Okay, so here's part 3 in the 68 Camaro Firewall floor pan series. And as I showed you in the previous video of the removal of all the junk that was in there and the prep work involved. Now I still have to apply weld through primer on all the weld seams everywhere, and I'll do that later. But I've been prepping the floor pan this morning as well, and just want to show you some of the stuff. I drilled a series of holes at about a 2-inch distance, and I also wanted to show you this. This is the seatbelt mount plate. You can see it right there, and that was originally welded to the frame rails. But these new pieces are already tacked to the floor pan, or spot welded to the floor pan. So what I did is I drilled a hole between those so that I can weld them back to the frame rail. And also drilled a series of holes at about a 2-inch gap all the way up the side. And then there's this heavier plate which creates the mount point for the frame itself. I drilled a couple holes, or 3 holes there, so that can be welded in as well. And other than that, I did trim back, as I discussed in the other video, because I put mini tubs in this car previously. I trimmed off all this section of the floor pan. Now the intent was that this will overlap slightly, and I may trim back as needed. I left it a little bit long, but not so long that it touches the wheel tub or mini tub. And as I said in the previous video, the reason I did that, and I'll show you again, when I put in these mini tubs from DSE, what you do is you lay out a template and you cut away so much material, but you don't cut all the material back. You leave about 3/4 of an inch, and then that gets bent down and creates a flange for this to mate against. So putting in this new floor pan, it would be too difficult to find that location and work it back and forth to get that, get that in there. The design is you put in the mini tubs and adjust the floor pan to fit. And in this case, I would be trying to adjust the floor pan to fit the mini tub. So I left this flange here, and I cut off that piece on the pan, and it's going to come up a little bit short. And then I'll decide how I want to do it. Sometimes I just will cut through both pieces, and that creates an even gap all the way down, and then weld it back together. But I haven't gotten that far. I'm going to test fit the floor pan, and I'll also, while I have the floor pan in, I will mark these holes on the bottom of the pan so that I can bare the metal. And I will also trace from the underside this area of the frame rail. And what that'll do, and I'll do my own little kind of marks so I know where my stop point is, but what that will let me do then later is when I take the pan back out and flip it back over, I can see where the lines were and basically just mark a series of holes and drill them, and then when I come back in, they'll be right there on the money. So I'm gonna see if I can't get this pan in and do a mock-up and go from there. Well, I've done a few test fits on this. I guess no real big issues. I had trouble getting it to go back as far as it needed to, and it just took some adjusting on the frame rails. I'll show you where it was hitting. Right in these curves primarily. I had to kind of dolly those down a little bit to give it some more room to go back. And also this one ear was too far forward, so I knocked it back a little bit, reshaped it again so the pan can go back. I've got everything prepped. The next step is I will spray everything with weld through primer, all the weld surfaces, and slide it up in there and do my final fit. Now I did notice also the frame rails I had to push up on them slightly. And I don't know if it's just because of, I mean, they're not super strong independently anyway. You can wiggle them around. So I may have to put a jack under those and just push up just a little tiny bit in order to make everything tight. But other than that, not too bad. Just takes some effort to test fit everything, and trim is needed to make it fit. Well, the floor pan is in place, and I've welded up the frame rail areas as I showed earlier. Got both sides done on that. I'm not totally sure how I'm going to finish this area here where this overlaps. I may trim this back just a little bit, and either I'm going to end up with a butt weld, or I'll do a slight lap weld. I'm not sure, but I'll get to that in a little bit. One of the other things I had to do was I mounted the spring perch pockets, because there's a bolt, two bolts that go into the new pan, and one existing bolt that goes into the frame rail. And with that gives me, I want to make sure that was in place so that my locations were correct for the springs. So that's done. I've welded in the support area here on both sides for this plate that the subframe bolts to. Both of those are in, and I wanted to make sure, when I did this, I had the firewall in place, because if you start welding on something and you don't have all the other stuff mocked up, you could be off. The plane could be off a little bit, and that could cause problems. So I wanted to make sure, so I had the firewall all clamped up, and then I welded the floor pan in. So at this point, I've got some markings where I'm at about a 2-inch interval or so, where I'm going to drill holes through the floor pan, and then I've marked the same areas on the firewall. And what I'll do is I'll bare the metal behind each one of those marks. Same way here on the side flanges. Also, let's see. I think I showed where this. I was happy with this structure here. The inner rocker on the passenger side and the outer was good and solid. But I think I showed earlier that the driver's side was really not in good shape. And I'd kind of made a little plate as a guide, and I cut that off because it wasn't going to work, or it didn't matter. But what I did, here's the piece that I cut off that was up here, and I wanted to replicate that. So I went back to my scrap pile, and I got a piece of that frame rail from the '65 Mustang, and that flange was just right. So I traced that out, cut it out with a plasma cutter, and then trimmed it down as needed. And that's welded in. I still have to grind it. This lower piece here, I just have that in place. I'll show you in a minute. So I can make this little plate and weld that in. But I'm going to rebuild this. Now what I'll do is, once I get this other plate in and trim it down as needed, I may not mess with the rest of this stuff just yet, because I'll probably put in the firewall and then build back to it. And that way I've got a really, good distance I can work with and build the piece to fit into it. And you can see it just has that little flange on the bottom there. And so I'd rather make sure the piece fit perfect than to have to modify it when I go to put the firewall in. Other than that, I put some seam seal or rust seal inside, and I'll probably put another coat, let that dry, and then spray it with primer as well. Try to stop any rust that may be still in there. Yeah, that's about it. I also mocked up the holes where I'm going to drill for the firewall to mount, and did some prep work up here on the firewall itself. So once I get finished with that little corner, I'll get the firewall in place after I drill all my holes, and hopefully I'll have it in soon. Alright, the main part of the firewall is welded in. I get all these perimeter welds done. Started doing some on the side here. I've actually run out of gas in my welder, so I'm gonna have to get it refilled tomorrow. The only issue I see is I've had a little bit of a problem with the alignment on this hole, and I don't know why. You know, I pushed over on it with a screwdriver in that hole and then welded these to hold it in place. And the one on the passenger side, it was pretty close. So I don't, it's not gonna hurt anything. I'll just have to clean that hole up just a little bit. I've got the inside welded, and I did have to take the hammer and kind of encourage this to fit better. You know, as you know, these stampings aren't perfect. So, you know, this is Dynacorn, this is AMD, and this may not even really be AMD. It may just be in an AMD box, this floor pan. So, just kind of, as I tack things down, you know, kind of massage them together. The hump's welded. Everything else is welded up on the inside. One thing I wanted to show you, sometimes you got to get creative. So I put some blocks on top of my jack in order to push those side panels out for the hump, and that way I could push in on the floor pan. Usually I use a handle from a hammer or something and make those welds, and that way I'm not, you know, fighting the shape of it. I'm sure you've seen these weights sitting up here, and the reason those weights are here is because with the front spring perches unhooked and the jack underneath the rocker panel, this car has no weight on it. So I was trying to keep the front end down a little bit with some weights. I've also got, I started welding these side plates, and I ran out of gas, so I'm probably done for today, and I'll finish up the rest of this tomorrow. But I think it's looking pretty good. I'm in the process now of smoothing up the firewall. Where I had done the welds, I ground those flat, and I'm using some Dolphin glaze to finish that out. And then what I'll do is tape it so that I can use seam sealer, and I'll tape a perimeter all the way around, following the line, and then also following the body line from the cowl, and then I'll brush in seam sealer along that edge. That'll make it look nice. I did finish up welding the sides, and I also finished building this little corner piece that was gone, so that's taken care of. And I also welded up the back of the floor pan. I ended up cutting off maybe ½ an inch and cut through this piece and the original flange that I talked about, and just did a butt weld. So the next step will be to get some self-etch on these areas and re-seam seal it, and also in the front get that taken care of, and I'll do one more shot to show how it all looks at the end.